Welcome back to the Street Photography Magazine podcast. I'm Bob Patterson, founder of Street Photography Magazine. And with us today is Mike Snyder, Michael O. Snyder. And Mike is, let's see, boy, how do I introduce you? He's an assistant professor of journalism or photojournalism at the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse University. And I'm sorry he had to turn his computer around so he'd get some more light on himself for the video version of this, because in the background, you could see the beautiful campus of Syracuse and the students walking between classes.
Yeah, I'm
And
looking at it just now. It's a sunny day up here in
he's going to
Syracuse,
be
and
distracted. It's a good thing it's like not a real super warm day up there, because
yeah,
then
it
he
isn't.
might
You saw
be,
my jacket behind me here just a minute ago.
in
It's
a park.
still winter weather here in mid-April, but
Yeah,
we're getting
so
there
Mike used
slowly.
to live near me in the Charlottesville area. That's how I met him. Actually, before I moved here, I made a trip over to the UVA Law School, University of Virginia Law School, because I was told they had a collection of photos that were donated, original photos by Andre Cortege. So I went in there to see if I could see some of the photos, and there was an exhibit. It was a contest, and Mike was one of the contributors. I saw his work and I said, "Oh, I have to get this guy on the podcast," as well as another person from the show. And I moved a few months later and we connected, and he was a guest on the podcast, and we did a feature story on him. We've been in touch ever since. And
Yeah,
even
that's
since he
right. Well,
moved up to, yeah. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I stepped
it's
on you.
no, I was going to say it's great to be back, and I had forgotten about that was our first intersection. That was a fun project. It was the one about spending 24 hours underground on the trains in
That's
Philadelphia.
right. You did
Yeah,
that. Yes, the thing in the Philadelphia subway.
yeah,
So I think
yeah.
you must have submitted that. And then, of course, I've been an admirer of his work ever since. I mean, other than an amateur street photographer like the rest of us, he's also a National Geographic photographer. He's a geologist, environmentalist, and he's traveled all over the world to some very interesting places, using his skills to help protect our environment, which does, well, I won't, I'll save other comments for later. But he's out. He's one of the good guys trying to protect this beautiful planet that we have. And also in the process, Mike, since he's been up in Syracuse teaching students, he's referred many people to us, students, past students, people that he's mentored. And so we've published many of them in the magazine. So I have to thank you for that. And we'll talk
No,
about that a
thank
little bit
you.
more as we go. Anyway, gee, I told your whole history anyway, but
Only the good parts of it, I'll be honest.
yeah, we'll just see. So we'll just jump into things. I mean, he does just amazing work, really amazing, beautiful work, and he does things the rest of us can only dream of. So Mike, I don't know where to start. You've done so many things. So let's start with street photography itself. And I mean, you connected with us years ago. I mean, it's been like 8 years ago. And like I said, you mentored many students and photographers in that tradition, in the street photography tradition. And I just wonder how you see that fitting into the larger ecosystem of documentary work, because Mike is primarily a documentary photographer and a brilliant storyteller. I mean, do you see street photography as a discipline into itself, or more of a foundational practice that leads into long-term projects, which you've done many of?
Yeah, great. Well, that's a great question to kick us off. But just before answering that, Bob, I want to
Mhm.
turn this around to you and say
Sure.
thank you so much for the incredible platform that you've created for people like myself and for students to share their work. I mean, that's just as important, as it is as making the work. There's so many people out there making work these days, but finding a place
Yes.
to put it that connects with audiences is essential. So I just wanted to turn this around and say thank you, because there's so many of us out there that wouldn't have the careers that we have if there weren't people like you that were making the space for that to get seen. And yes, I've had a lot of wonderful students come through you as well. So just wanted to say thank you for all the good work.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thank you. And I mean, just speaking of our platform, I mean, it has really been a labor of love doing this, and that's what it's all about. Is creating a place where people can be seen and take them to the next level in terms of showing their work and then being able to promote the fact that they've been in the magazine, which helps, really helps get the ball rolling to do others bigger and better things. And you've
Yeah.
always, I mean, one thing I've really admired about you, you've taken advantage of a lot of the online platforms. You just mentioned Lens work, and you were also pretty involved in the Social Documentary Network a
Hmm.
while back, and their
Hmm.
magazine, and you're not just in National Geographic. I mean, you could just stop there, and that's plenty. But you also take advantage of other platforms as well. And
Yeah.
well,
Well, this
why
is
don't you
one of the
talk about
great.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the great benefits of being an independent photographer, right? Is that
Yes.
I can move work around to a lot of different places, and of course, part of the reason for doing that is you can reach different and more diverse audiences. And I think, as somebody that really cares about a lot of the stories that I work on, and I work on stories in part because I believe storytelling can help contribute to social change. Part of the goal there is to reach new, different, and more diverse people. Like we have to build better, bigger, broader coalitions. And one of the great ways to be able to do that is to work with lots of different kinds of media outlets and to work with different kinds of media, to work with different kinds of storytellers and different kind of collaborators and different kinds of impact organizations. So yeah, I've strategically placed myself so that I can take all of the projects that I do and try to shop them out to different places and different ways and build a big network. So I feel very privileged to do that, and it's been wonderful because I get to walk in so many different spaces and meet so many different kinds of people and different kinds of audiences and tell different kinds of stories. It does mean that you got to scramble a lot, of course, to be an independent, and that's a challenge. I was just joking earlier today with one of the deans here at the college that I've made it into my mid 40s. This is the first real job I've ever had.
That's
You
pretty
know,
good.
I've Yeah, it's not bad to make it this far before I got a full time staff position somewhere. But yeah, it has its perks. Certainly being independent. And there's loads more I can say about that. But I do want to go back to your first question about the relationship between street photography and documentary, because I think that's such a great question here. So I'll say first that I think for me, and this is probably true for a lot of people, that street photography was sort of the gateway drug for so many other things that I did. It's sort of where I
Mhm.
got started first. It's kind of a natural place to start. You go out into the world, and if you're the sort of person that is journalistically minded or documentary minded, you're just interested in people, right? You're interested in
Mhm.
people and light and spaces and cultures. And so, I remember when I would travel whenever I was in my teens or 20s before I was shooting a lot, and I would just like wish my eyes were cameras because like I just want to remember and record all these magical things that I'm seeing and experiencing. And so the logical next step for that is to actually pick up a camera and start shooting. And so that's where I got my start, was kind of shooting while I was traveling. I was just mentioning to you that a bit more than 20 years ago now, I was living in Japan. And at the end of that time, I took this long trip back to the United States, but I didn't have enough money for a flight. So I ended up taking trains back. That went down through Japan, then across China, Mongolia, Russia, and all the way back through Europe. And yeah, that was the first time that I ever kind of built a cohesive project that I later published. And then I worked on a number of other pieces. Like you said, I did this piece, or we started talking about where I went with a friend and we spent 24 hours living underground in the Philadelphia subway. That was a number of years later. And I say that street photography was a gateway drug, not that I've moved on from it. I mean, I still do street work. I love street work. I teach street work. It influences so much of what I do. But I think a lot of people that start into that space, as soon as you take those first steps, you start getting closer to people and closer to people. You just want to keep getting closer, right? That's kind of a natural thing for a lot of us. We just get more and more curious and we get more comfortable building access and asking questions. And the logical thing that follows on from there is like, whoa, there's all these stories. It's like, why stand back and tell a story that's constructed about a space, maybe quite literally a street or collection of streets, when I could dive into the world of somebody and tell their story, and maybe that somehow translates to an issue that's much bigger. So I think, a lot of us kind of start in street, and again, some stay there. But for me and for a lot of other photojournalists and documentary photographers, you really go from there to being committed to story and to what that means and what that tells us. Your second part of the question, do I see a hard definition, say, between street photography and documentary? I don't really. The way I define documentary work is it's a very broad umbrella. Um, and it would include sometimes even creative work. It includes photojournalism. It includes street. So all of those, and they are different things, but they all, to me, kind of fit together under that broader umbrella. And I would say for me, street photography is just taking that broad observational view, right? It's not necessarily narrative driven. It's not necessarily social documentary, although it could be. You could have a social
Mhm.
issue tied. It's when you're really trying to explore a time or a place or a culture or a space, and you're doing it in usually a hyper observational way. I say that's as a kind of a broad definition. That's what street is. But like I said before, you can do that work, and that could translate right into a different approach where you find one character and then you say, oh my gosh, like you're just fascinating. I want to get closer and work with you. And that might end up being a photojournalism project. So for a lot of people in my space, and certainly for me, yes, they're different, but there's a real fluidity that kind of happens between those things. And there's a lot of cross-pollinating between those ways of looking at them.
Yeah, going back to the mentoring and the teaching you've been done, I assume you've been teaching students sort of not your process, but how you take advantage of lots of different platforms to help build an audience. And I've seen that here, as I mentioned earlier, who you've referred to many people to present work to us. Every time I've heard from somebody that you sent to us, I don't even have to know that you sent them because of how prepared they are. And I don't know if I'm going to give any secrets away, but I get a message from the person. It always starts with the pitch, a nice little elevator speech about what it's all about. That is so professional. And so they do a little snippet, what it's about, and then they give us a little more detail and couple photo samples, and that's it. And I've seen it several times, so I'm gonna ask you. I mean, and it always gets our attention because it's so straightforward, and I know it's coming from they learned it from a professional. So, I wonder if you could share a little bit of that with our listeners, is how you recommend somebody approach a publisher or like a lens worker or somebody like that.
Gosh, that's such a great question. Okay, well, let's just take a few steps back first and ask the bigger question around this is why is it so important to get this right? Why is the way that you pitch and who you pitch to, why does that matter? And what I oftentimes say to students is, look, one of the things that's so exciting about being a visual storyteller in the 21st century is that this skill set has been democratized. If we go back 30 years, 50 years, 70 years, the technology was extremely expensive and it was kind of rare, right? Not every place on the planet could be able to get access to a camera. It was an enormous privilege to be able to do this work. A lot of times it was done by wealthier white Western men, and that's still the truth, but that has spread in a lot of ways. And so that's really cool and it's super exciting, right? We have everyone now more or less on this planet. The number is growing every day that have a camera in their pocket with their phone, right? Access to technology that we couldn't have dreamed of, even when I was younger starting in this career. So super duper cool. Now, the challenge is that means that there are millions of talented storytellers out there, right? And so how do you, I don't want to say compete because I don't think necessarily we're in competition with each other, but if you want to get your work seen and you want to be able to step up and out and build a career in this space, you're going to have to find a way to gain access to these platforms, right? To do more than just make great images, you've got to tell great stories and you've got to connect with audiences and so on. Okay, so it's super duper important to really think about not just what you make and how you edit it and so on, but the distribution component to this, right? And to really think about that from inception. It's super important. The second thing I say is, well, look, here's the reality of this industry. There are millions of us. There's less editors, and they are the ones that hold the power ultimately. I mean, really, that's where it's at, right? That's the people. There's a lot of people you have to know in this industry to work well. But one of the critical groups of people you really need to know and understand, and that's the key thing, really understand what they need is editors, because they're the ones that hold the gates for the large part, right? They have access to these platforms that we want to get on. So yeah, come to know editors, become friends with editors, and understand their love language. So to get to your question, like, what is that love language? Like, what do you
I
want to
like that
communicate? Well,
term. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. You guys have needs too. That's the thing, right? Is that like
Yeah.
editors have a job and they are beholden to their bosses, which who are often editors or sometimes owners of the outlet, or sometimes themselves if they own the outlet, and they're beholden to their audience, right? So you just need to know that like they have needs that need to be met too. So it depends. It certainly depends on the outlet. So it's hard to give like a universal formula, but when you are giving formulas, one of the things you often I say to my students is number one, so Why this? Why now? Why you? Okay. So
Hmm.
why this, right? The topic that you're presenting, it may be interesting and relevant to you, but don't forget, you're looking for an audience of millions, ideally, or maybe it's a select audience, but it's a specific audience, and you need to know that they may not know why this is important. So you're gonna have to make that case. So why is this the thing we need to study? Why is the way in which you are studying it important? What's your surprising or unique angle or pitch on this? Like, we need to remember we are maxed out on attention, right? Well, things are pulling us left and right in every which way. And there's hardly anything that's new under the sun. So how is what you are doing relevant and important and interesting and different and unique? And man, oh man, you got to make that case and you got to make it fast. Okay, that's number one. Number two, why now? Okay, a lot of times when we're trying to pitch stories, we're trying to pitch them with some sort of hook with something that's going on in the broader public discourse, right? So there's something political that's happening, or maybe there's some bigger social issue that we care about, but there was just some big blow up on it, in this country or some other country, and people are talking about that right now. We try to time our pitches with what is going on. And sometimes that could be seasonally too. Like, I pitch a lot of stories about places that have extreme weather. Like, I work in Arctic places, for example, but a lot of times in the American media, those might pitch during the winter months because they look and feel like what people are thinking about. So we really need to think about why this needs to come out right now and make that clear and make that a case. I'll say one more thing while I'm here. I had a story one time that I pitched 70 times, and it was 70 rejections until it was finally a yes. It was a piece that I did for the Washington Post. And the reason why it was a yes is because the topic became topical again. And I can say more about that. But you've got to be resilient. You've got to keep pitching. And then finally, why you? Right. One of the things I think is, again, that's really great is that in media these days, we are thinking a lot more carefully about who gets to tell stories. Right. It used to be that just the powerful and the privileged do. Again, that's still an issue. But nowadays, magazines, outlets, funders, and so on are very interested in why you as a storyteller are doing this. So what is it that you bring to this? Why do you care about this? How do you intersect with this? What do you know about this? How does your identity and lived experience intersect with this? Does the access you have, is that ethical? Right? This is important too. And so you want to let your editor know the way that you intersect with this and why this is important, because they're going to get asked those questions too. So I think those are the big ones up front, and you got to keep it short, and you got to say exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it, and you got to be polite. And if you do that, you have a chance.
Good advice. Good advice for everybody who wants to be recognized, and not just sending things to Street Photography Magazine. It's anybody. Like you said, those gatekeepers. I like that. I like that term. Their love language. I get that. I'm going to steal that. But I'll
It's
give
a
you
good
full
one.
credit for it.
Oh, I stole it from someone else. So you
Did you? Okay.
keep on passing it along.
Okay. Yeah, because speaking of pitching stories, you had sent something to us. I think it was about a year ago. You were down by, what's the place with the little colonial town in Virginia?
Yeah, Williamsburg. Yeah.
Near Williamsburg, you discovered this place with all these rotting presidential heads.
Yep.
And it was super interesting. In fact, Ashley chose one of your photos as we chose our favorite photos of the year, did a
I saw that.
video podcast about it. And she chose one of yours. I think it was Lincoln. I'm thinking, where is this place? It's not far from me. This is wacky, but you found this place and you did a really cool photo story about it. And then lo and behold, probably a couple months ago, it's like early in the year, Washington Post published a story. I think it was the Washington Post, not by you, it was by somebody else. They must have stolen your idea. But, you wrote such a good pitch. I said, let's look at this. They go, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much for taking it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, like a lot of my work these days is like longitudinal feature story based stuff, and mostly connected to environmental issues. That's kind of mostly what I get paid to do. That said, I love getting to do little pieces like this, right? Like, one of the joys of having a camera is it's a passport to all these wonderful and weird and bizarre places. And I had come across President's Park or Presidential Park somewhere. And again, I wasn't the first to document this thing. There are other people that have come before, but I found this thing. It's just amazing for folks that haven't seen this story before or found it online. You can Google it, but there's this place where this guy tried to build this park with these huge kind of monumental busts, meaning like just the head and the shoulders of these presidents, but the park went upside down financially, and those heads wound up essentially in this very wet field not far from the Chesapeake Bay, where they are delightfully visually rotting away. basically. And for kind of a sort of an obvious metaphor, read into it however you want about the state of American democracy. It sits there for people to go and take photographs of it. So I really wanted to go and photograph this place for personal reasons. But again, kind of thinking about audiences, there's a dialogue right now about the state that American democracy is in, and what it means, and how we can fix it, and what's broken, and so on. And so there's, without putting your finger on the scale in any sort of way, or maybe even directly talking about that issue, you can be around it and contribute to it by telling a story that is at least incidental to it. So I went and photographed these things, and again, like I was saying before, part of the goal here is like, how can you do this a little bit different? It's been done before. How can you do this a little bit differently? And so I went and tried to shoot them. I've got a lot of the work that I do. I use field strobes. So a strobe is, for those that don't know, is a big fancy flash. Basically, it's a flash, but they're larger and they throw much better light and brighter light. And so you can create the kind of lighting situations that you could maybe make in a studio. But we bring those into the field to make what can almost look like very natural, beautiful light, but it's actually coming from a flash as opposed to from the sun. So anyway, I shot these things with a flash and wrote a little article about it. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for covering it. It was a super fun shoot.
And your work was much better than the work that was in the post.
Why, thank you.
Yeah. No offense to the person who did it, but they slogged around in the mud to get it too. You know what? When we first met, I remember you telling me a story about how you were doing work in Norway. I think it was Norway, somewhere way up north. You're kind of an Arctic guy anyway. That's probably why you live in Syracuse. You're closer to it there. But you once said that where a story happens is as important as the subject itself. And I wonder if you could unpack that a bit. I mean, how do you go about reading a location and deciding that it has enough narrative weight to carry a long-term project?
Yeah. What a great question. So I'll say first, and this maybe speaks to my supposed hardiness. So I grew up in a little town, coal mining town in Appalachia, right near the border of West Virginia and Western Maryland. And so I grew up in the hills, grew up on 12 acres of reclaimed mining land, running around in the forests and dodging sunken landmines. And so being outdoors and being in place has been a part of my life for as long as I can possibly remember. And, when I think about the stories that I grew up around, both, traditional folklore stories, but also stories of environmental stories of how the land was changing, how the people were changing, how the ecosystems were changing, they're all set in place, right? Absent place, which is the context, it's the background, it's the bowl that holds the whole thing. Those stories don't really make sense, to be honest. Like they are, if you take away the place, you lose what it means to be a people in that place, right? It's all set in the environment, whether we're aware of it or not. So when I teach storytelling or I work on stories myself, I remind myself that one of the things we need to do is to get the audience to understand the depth of the human and non-human world relationship, right? Whether that's the animal world or whether it's the broader environment. So yeah, it's a wonderful place to start. I'm surprised by the number of stories that I work on where I see people have done these great, beautiful, intimate portraits of the people and these heart-wrenching, moments of loss and grief and redemption and reconciliation on the other ends, but they forget to take 10 steps back and take a place-setter shot and remind us where we are, right? So yeah, to me, it's important, I think, because of where I come from. Also, again, I'm a geologist and environmental scientist by training. That's what I studied. So I suppose I think about place maybe a little bit more than the average photographer. But yeah, I think it's super important, and it's probably one of the reasons why I naturally gravitated towards working with National Geographic, which of course does such a great job. They have maps in almost every story that they publish.
Yes, they do.
Which I love, right? Because where this is happening on the planet matters. It matters a lot.
Yeah. Speaking of National Geographic, you said you're doing a project with them about the World Heritage sites. It's funny because in my travels, I keep running into World Heritage sites. You walk into a place, this is a World Heritage site. Wow, that's pretty neat. So you're doing some work with National Geographic on how they're affected by climate change. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So,
or is that a secret?
No, it's out. We are.
Okay.
We are out and live. So I am working for an organization called Preserving Legacies, which is funded by National Geographic Society. So National Geographic Society, in addition to be connected to the magazine and is a storytelling organization, also funds a lot of really exciting research and social good work around the planet. And one of their larger grants right now funds an organization called Preserving Legacies. And Preserving Legacies is on a mission to help World Heritage sites, but more broadly, cultural heritage sites and natural heritage sites adapt to climate change. And part of the reason for this is that, when you look at the climate dialogue, a lot of what gets left out of the conversation is culture, right? We talk a lot about natural disasters. We talk a lot about the economics behind this, but we forget that places and practices, not just the tangible heritage, the physical places that we care about, but the culture that fills them is changing and will change because of climate change. So the question with the stories that I'm telling isn't just what are those impacts, and that is important. We want to document that and share that, hopefully try to make it real for people that climate change is not an abstraction. It's happening now. And more often than not, it's happening to the most vulnerable people on the planet. But it's not just about what's happening from a negative impact perspective. It's all the amazing, exciting, inspiring things that are happening on the solution side of things. And so a lot of my work right now is looking at the solutions-based storytelling. And what's exciting about these solutions is that many of them, they're this blended approach, right? I'll give you an example. I've worked on maybe 14 stories or so far underneath this banner, but one of the first ones I did was about the ancient historic site of Petra, which is in Jordan. Which is this amazing, iconic location. If you haven't seen it before, you can go watch Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Famously, it's the backdrop of the film, and Indiana Jones is riding down this narrow canyon, and this great rock wall appears in front of him, and there's this carven, sort of like a big large church into the facade. This big stone building, almost like a castle that's carved into the rock, right? So that's Petra, and this was made thousands of years ago. And so anyway, it's a site that is iconic, and it brings millions of people to Jordan every single year, and it's being impacted by climate change in a number of ways. But I think most pressingly is these greater floods that are happening in the region now. So it's these very steep canyons, and when it rains, and now when it rains more. Of course, it's hotter and drier usually, but then when it rains, it pours. It rushes down these canyons and it floods them out. Okay, so that impacts the site. It's abrading the site. It's washing the stone away, but it's also very dangerous for tourists and, of course, people that live and work in the site, because you have these sudden flash floods. Okay, so that's what's happening. But here's where the story gets really interesting, right? You could just take a photo of the floods, and maybe if people running away from them or crying if something's been damaged or whatever. But let's move on from that. And here's what's cool is that a number of years ago, archaeologists at the site, they were using ground penetrating radar and other techniques. And what they found is hidden behind the rock walls that everyone knows about, there's this hidden system of channels, rock channels that were carved in behind the wall. And it turns out the ancient Nabateans, they knew this place flooded, right? It's flooding worse today, but this isn't new news exactly. They understood the land they were working in. And so they carved these channels high up in the rock to move the water away from the main canyon and into these back canyons where the water can be stored and be able to use for camels, or maybe even for growing grapes for vineyards. They don't know for sure, but there's these channels. And also high up in the land surrounding, they built a series of terraces that could trap the water and then be used for irrigation. So by using modern technology to rediscover these things, but also looking at indigenous and local knowledge, putting these two things together, we make the solution for the future. So now they got the caretakers of the site custodians got a grant, and they're rebuilding these systems. And by rebuilding these systems, hopefully there's a way to reduce the impact of floods on the site. So these are the kind of solutions that I'm looking for, is how can we bridge indigenous and local knowledge and values and traditions with modern technology and best practice to be able to hopefully adapt some of these sites to climate change.
Wow, that's fascinating. Speaking of National Geographic, I mean, you've been doing work with them for quite a while. National Geographic carries a lot of weight. There's a platform and there's a aesthetic tradition. And so when you're working on a project for them, I mean, how much creative latitude do you have to be able to navigate? And how can you navigate the tension between your documentary voice and then their expectations?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. Every outlet has a brand. right?
Yeah.
And some are tighter than others. There are some outlets that sort of leave a lot of space to be able to interpret the way you want to see and color and shoot and light the world, and other ones that is much stricter. And to, explore what you're getting after here, Nat Geo is probably on the stricter end of that. They've got a brand, they've got an approach, they've got a style. And so certainly if you want to shoot for an outlet like that, it behooves you to read and to
Yeah.
look at and explore the catalog. So, certainly I have done that, and I would say my work, the way I'm trying to approach it, I'm trying to fit within that. So, and I'm probably a natural fit. Also, the way that I would like to shoot, the way that I approach stories, it probably just naturally and generally kind of fits into the way I'm a color photographer. I think very carefully about lighting. A lot of the stories that I work on are sort of bridging culture and science, which is a good fit for Nat Geo. So there's just some way that I'm a natural fit. I'll say this: when I pitch stories over to them, I've never been asked by them to say, could you color it a little bit more this way, or I feel like you've done too much with it there. They've always been allowed me the leeway to be able to shoot and color the way that I'm good at shooting color. But of course, I think part of that is because I know the rules, right? I'm not breaking them. So I know that there's no composting of images. I'm working photojournalistically, right? So I'm not able to manipulate them in the way you would be able to do if it was an art-based practice, for example. And, I know I can't grossly swap out colors for others and so on. So I think by kind of playing in the rules and staying in the lane, I've been able to stay pretty close to the way that they want me to shoot. But yeah, it varies. There are other outlets where you've got a lot more space to be able to make it however you want to make it. And that's part of what makes it cool, is that you shoot very differently from the way everyone else shoots. So it really depends. It depends.
So when you lived in Central Virginia, did you connect with any of the, um, let's say, older traditional National Geographic photographers who live in the area, like Bill
Yeah.
Allard or Sam Abel?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I did.
Did you?
Yeah, I don't know whether people know this or not, but
Yeah.
National Geographic is based in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
and Charlottesville, Virginia is just 2.5 hours or so down the road, and it's a little bit of a haven for
Yeah.
old photo heads. We got a lot of famous folks there in the area. So yeah, I made my rounds, and I got a chance to talk to quite a few people and get some mentorship, which I benefited a lot from, actually. And I don't know if you know this, Bob, too. I think you do, but I had an artist studio at the McGuffey Art Center in
Yeah.
downtown
Yes, I do.
Charlottesville, which is just like, talk about a dream for a photographer. I mean, this gorgeous old school building right off of one of America's best walking malls, these tall ceilings, and lots of wonderful people have come through that space too. So I was very happy in my studio, and it was among one of the harder things I had to leave whenever I
I
moved up
bet.
here. So
I bet. That's quite a
it is.
yeah. So, what else are you working on now? Anything you can talk about?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me, I'll share a bit more about the project. So most of what I'm doing now, so, as you mentioned, I'm in Syracuse University, assistant professor here in the visual communications department. So I mostly teach photojournalism, documentary photography, a little bit of documentary filmmaking as well. So that occupies a lot of my time, and it's a wonderful thing to be occupied. I have some wonderful students and colleagues here, so I'm very, very happily employed and busy in that way. But that still leaves me my summer and winter months and spring break and so on, and that's where this grant from Nat Geo fits in. And I've been working on stories. I was in Colombia, and I was in Bhutan and Mongolia. I was in West Africa. I was up in
Oh my
Canada. I had a
God.
piece out in Nat Geo earlier this year from a frozen lake in Canada. I'm going back to. It was in Ireland, working on the Scalig Islands, where these great monasteries are last year. This summer, I'm going to be going back to Europe. I'm working on a story about how these spa towns in Europe are changing due to climate change, mostly because of the way the underground hydrology is changing. So I'm busy. What's kind of crazy about it is, in part by taking this job and not being an independent anymore, I can be a lot more focused, right? Because I don't have to spend so much time trying to
Yeah.
earn enough money to stay alive. I actually have enough that I can more or less eat. And that's allowed me to be able to focus more on these stories that I want to tell. So my sole client right now is this project with National Geographic Society. And yeah, those are some of the locations that I'm going to. So if there's any one of those spots that strikes a chord for you, I'm happy to talk about some of the stories, but I can let you choose your own adventure if you want.
Yeah, that's something else. Well, I was gonna ask you about how your move to becoming an academician affects your work as an independent photographer. Well, you just answered that. So
Yeah.
you've you've taken that away from me.
Well, I'm happy if you want to pick one of those locations. I can tell you a story about that, and then I've also got a new book project. So you let me know which direction you want to go here. I'm happy to
Well, tell me
go
about the
any way you
book
want to.
project.
Okay, yeah. So I'm super excited about this. I just published my very first photo book, and it is a photo book, but it's also an oral history book, which I would say I'm equally as proud of. So the backstory on this is whenever I moved back to the US, I was living in the UK for a while. I went to graduate school at the University of Edinburgh, and I lived in Scotland for 4 years. And I moved back to the United States in 2011. And it was right around this time I was sort of stepping out as a full-time visual storyteller. I'd done that for some years before, but then I was like, I'm going to give this a go, doing this full time. But when I got back, I didn't really have anywhere to go. I didn't have any money, so I wound up at home, as you do. And again, that's back in Appalachia. Yeah, I was sort of looking for things to do, and I came across this grant that a few people in my community were working on to tell stories about Appalachian traditions as they are changing. And of course, what's wild about Appalachia today is it's arguably changing faster than any time in its history, and maybe faster than anywhere else in the United States. This is a place that it's famously insular, famously traditional, but now all of a sudden has opened up in a variety of ways. We have highways and the internet, and that's new. I mean, that's really new, right? Whenever I was in high school and I went away to college, people were blown away by how insulated I had been. I had seen computers, but I had not spent a lot of time. And this is only back in 1999, I guess I went away to college. But a lot of our roads, even back then, were still dirt roads, and there was very little connectivity. So in the last 20, 30 years, things have really changed, right? So here's the question: how are these traditions changing? How can we hold on to them? Of course, traditions are very, very important, but how can we also allow them to adapt and breathe and make space for new people and new identities and new ways of thinking about that and new traditions, right? Like, in other words, what does it mean to be Appalachian today? And who gets to say what that is? And what does that sound like, right? And so that's the thesis question of the project. And I spent 14 years working on that, not full-time, part-time, when I would get grants or I'd self-fund it for a while. And I went around and I shot, I think at the end of the day, it was 111 profiles. And so what I would do is I'd shoot a portrait, and then I would do an oral history, something like a 1 to 3 hour interview. And then I would compress that down to, 800 words kind of in the person's own voice. And I would pair that with a portrait. And so you kind of have this oral history and this portrait that goes together. And the book publishes 77 of those stories, along with an essay that I wrote to open up the book. And, in a lot of ways, I think for me, it's a love letter to a place that's probably more home than anywhere else on the planet. Even growing up, I moved around a bit, and I moved around a lot since I lived there, but that's where my heart is. I think when I think about who I am and the values that inform me, I think I'm probably more Appalachian, interchangeable, those two terms, than anywhere else. So, I think getting to work on a story about where I'm from and about people that I know and stories that I'm connected to is a great joy, especially for someone that spends so much time traveling to other sides of the planet. It was really nice to be at home. And the other reason I think for doing it is, partially challenging the narrative about that place. A lot of the media about Appalachia is very negative, and it focuses on the struggles. And of course, the struggles are real. I'm not denying that. I saw a lot of that growing up. It's still real today. But the truth is there's a lot more. There's a lot more to the place than that. And so I think we've done ourselves a disservice by not listening to that diversity of voices and perspectives. And I also think it's a disservice to the place. I mean, my research into the theories of communications, especially when it comes to environmental issues, but also, social issues, is just how disempowering it is to hear over and over again that you're broken and that there's no hope and this is useless. People in the communities, impacted communities, take that on, right? And so positive stories of the quest for hope and reconciliation and truth and justice and beauty, I'm more drawn to these, I think. And my hope has been that I make this book, and someday, somewhere, a kid in a school in Appalachia might pick one of these up in a library and read it and say, "Hey, you know what? This place I'm from is pretty cool. I want to be a part of this." And I'm excited to say, to kind of wrap up this little story here, that I got a grant last year and then also a very wonderful uh, philanthropic individual from the region purchased, I want to say maybe 500 copies of the book. I don't remember the exact
Really?
number, but to donate to schools and libraries throughout the region, and that happened. And I've been told recently that there are some schools that are piloting having students write book report projects and even go out and do their own photos and oral histories. And I think that's one of the things that's cool about a model like that is honestly anybody can go out and take pictures in their community and ask people the same questions that I ask. So yeah, I'm really excited that project is living on in its own way.
That's really cool. I also grew up in Appalachia. Continually
Where are you
bug
from, Bob?
myself. I'm from the Ohio River Valley in
Uh-huh.
Ohio, right across the river from West Virginia and next to Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
Columbiana County, Ohio. And I went to school at Ohio University, which is obviously right in the heart of Appalachia. And so I understand. And I want to get a copy of this book.
Well, I realized I talked
Yeah.
about it. I didn't even bother
Yeah.
to say the title of it. So,
Yeah.
uh, the name of the book is Alleghenia, Central Appalachian Folklore Anthology, and it's available through Bitter Southerner Press. You can find it online. It is also carried in some stores. And then the broader project that sort of came before that is called the Mountain Traditions Project. So it's been published underneath both of those names. There's a podcast online too for folks that want to check that out there, called the Mountain Traditions Podcast, Mountain Traditions Project podcast, maybe. Yeah, so take a look at it. I think they did a beautiful job with it over there at Bitter Southerner, and they've been really great partners on this.
Yeah. Did you do anything from my region? Or were you?
From Virginia or from
Yeah.
over on the Ohio side?
Yeah, from the Ohio side. But yeah, I know you're from Maryland area and just
Yeah.
south of PA. And yeah.
Well, this is a really great question, actually,
Yeah.
that underlies this is that, okay, you're telling stories about Appalachia. Where is this
Whatever.
place?
Take your pick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So, and you know what's interesting about that is that that's actually a more contentious question than many people would think. There are some that define that very strictly and also very differently. There is a geologic definition. There are different cultural definitions. There are legal definitions
Yep.
of what's in and what's out. So I went for more of a personal and kind of prosaic definition. I really centered it around my own experiences. So again, I'm from the Allegheny Highlands,
Yeah.
which is it's really not a state-based thing. It's more of a physiographic region that spans from kind of central West Virginia up through western Maryland and up into southwestern Pennsylvania. The Allegheny Highlands are mountains that run through there. And so I sort of placed a pin in the middle of that and drew kind of a rough, 150 mile circle around that. So rather than try to tell stories about the whole of Appalachia, and that of course would include Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina, and I'm even down into Alabama. You could argue up into
it's big.
Pennsylvania, New York. I mean, again, the list of potential inclusion goes on. I kept it quite geographically tight. All of the profiles that I did are in West Virginia, Western Maryland, Pennsylvania, Southwest Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So the closest I came to Ohio, I think I did one out in Hundred, West Virginia, which is kind of like west of Morgantown, if you sort of, it's out towards the northern peaky panhandle, maybe only another 50 miles, not even that, probably less from the Ohio border. And I did a story out there about a logger, but no, nothing over in Ohio, not because I've got anything against Ohio or I don't think it counts, simply because it wasn't within the frame that I was.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Well, you can only do so much, right? So you gotta limit yourself somewhere. Good, until started preparing for this, I didn't realize it came out in the book. I knew about the podcast and listened to the podcast, but that's very interesting. There's a story everywhere, and you prove
Absolutely.
that. And
well, and
yeah,
that's what I say to my students. If you're going to do documentary work, you don't need to fly halfway around the planet to do it. I
No.
don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I believe if you want to go out and tell stories and people give you permission to tell those stories and you feel like you can tell it in a way that's ethical and accurate and relevant and so on, then sure, travel and do that. That's fine. But the truth is, there's stories in your family. You may not want to tell those stories, but there's stories right there. There's stories in your community. There's stories with your neighbors.
Yeah.
There's stories with your community of identity, with your community of culture more broadly. So, start where you are, where you have trust, where you share the language, you share understanding, you share that access. Because honestly, at the end of the day, you need to have a great story, but you need access to that story to make it work. And absent that access, it's very, very difficult to tell that story in a way that's real and authentic and intimate. So no, you're totally right. There's stories everywhere. And the place to start looking for them is where you sit.
Yep, yep, exactly. I know we often think, yeah, I have to do like Mike and fly to Norway or to Ireland or wherever. That's where I'll find stories. But there's probably people in Ireland and Norway that want to come to wherever you are to find stories there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
So, oh, Mike, well, thank you very much. I'd like to get a link from you when we're done to the book if you've got a direct link to purchase it, and we'll put that in there. But really, I'm glad. I appreciate everything you've done for the magazine, sending great photographers our way, giving advice. Well, I can't leave without this. You know, I've been working on a small book myself on the jazz community, local story. Mike was kind enough to be one of the reviewers of my photos to help me narrow them down, and it was real nice to have a professional photojournalism teacher look at my work. So I really appreciate that. It was a huge help to me. Some of the things you said were like guiding lights for me in making final selections.
Oh,
Thank you very much for that.
no, it's my privilege and my pleasure, Bob. And again, that's great work. I'm excited to see whenever that comes out. And again, I can't say how much I appreciate, yeah, what you guys are doing with this podcast and with Street Photography Magazine. It's been a guiding light for a lot of people and myself included. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.